What if I told you the future of justice in America began with a knock on an old wooden door? In a forgotten corner of Georgia, an elderly woman opened her home to a bruised boy who spoke only 4 words. Please don't make me go. She didn't. Ask why. She didn't hesitate. And that single moment of silent love would go on to change the course of U.S. history. This is not fiction. It's a true story of compassion, resilience, and the unshakable bond between a foster child and the woman who refused to let him disappear. From sleeping on a stranger's couch to becoming a federal judge, Elijah Carter's journey is one of the most powerful transformations you'll ever hear. So if you believe in the kind of kindness that builds legacies, stay with us. Because this story, it doesn't just warm hearts, it rebuilds faith in humanity. What if I told you the future of justice in America began with a knock on an old wooden door? In a forgotten corner of Georgia, an elderly woman opened her home to a bruised boy who spoke only 4 words. Please don't make me go. She didn't. Ask why. She didn't hesitate. And that single moment of silent love would go on to change the course of U.S. history. This is not fiction. It's a true story of compassion, resilience, and the unshakable bond between a foster child and the woman who refused to let him disappear. From sleeping on a stranger's couch to becoming a federal judge, Elijah Carter's journey is one of the most powerful transformations you'll ever hear. So if you believe in the kind of kindness that builds legacies, stay with us. Because this story, it doesn't just warm hearts, it rebuilds faith in humanity. In the quietest corner of East Atlanta, where the sidewalks cracked like old memories and the magnolia trees bowed with grace over rusted fences, there stood a modest little house at the end of Sycamore Lane. It wasn't fancy. The paint peeled at the edges. The porch creaked when you stepped just right, and the mailbox hung slightly askew, as if time had leaned against it too long. But somehow, that house held more warmth than a mansion with chandeliers. Inside lived a woman named Grace Holloway. Not Reverend, not Doctor, not Mrs. Anything, just Miss Grace. She didn't have a husband or kids at home. She didn't post on Facebook or own a microwave. But if you lived within 5 blocks of that porch, you knew her name like you knew your own mother's hum. She was the kind of woman who waved to strangers, baked biscuits from scratch every Sunday, and never let anyone leave her house without a full belly and a little more hope. People called her different names. The Porch Saint, the Last Good Soul on Sycamore Lane. But to most, she was simply Mama Grace. Her home smelled like stories: warm cornbread, black-eyed peas, a hint of vanilla from the cookies she always had on the table. And always, always, there was gumbo simmering on the stove, even if no one was expected. She lived alone, but she wasn't lonely. Her life moved in gentle rhythms: sunlight across tomato vines in the morning, gospel on the radio by noon, and her rocker swaying softly by dusk. She didn't rush, didn't shout, didn't worry. Not much, anyway. At 72, she had seen too much of the world to let it shake her anymore. Until that night. The rain came soft at first, like a secret, a hush against the windows, the kind of drizzle that made everything seem slower, softer, more fragile. Grace was pulling a skillet of cornbread from the oven, its crust just the right kind of golden, when she heard it. A knock, not loud, not hurried, a whisper of a sound. So faint it might have been the wind if it weren't for that second knock. Then a third. Grace paused. Her heart didn't race, but it leaned forward, alert, the kind of alert that only women like her, who've buried husbands, raised neighbors' kids, and prayed through long nights, ever understand. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved toward the door. When she opened it, the world tilted. There, under the dim porch light, stood a boy. No more than 10, soaked from the rain, bruised in places no child should be, shaking not just from the cold, but from something deeper. He didn't say much, just 4 words. Please don't make me go. Grace didn't flinch. She didn't ask why. She didn't look around for someone else to help. She simply reached out her hand, no questions, no hesitation. just the quiet certainty of someone who'd always believed a door wasn't meant to keep people out, but to let healing in. And just like that, a new chapter began. In the quietest corner of East Atlanta, where the sidewalks cracked like old memories and the magnolia trees bowed with grace over rusted fences, there stood a modest little house at the end of Sycamore Lane. It wasn't fancy. The paint peeled at the edges. The porch creaked when you stepped just right, and the mailbox hung slightly askew, as if time had leaned against it too long. But somehow, that house held more warmth than a mansion with chandeliers. Inside lived a woman named Grace Holloway, not Reverend, not Doctor, not Mrs. Anything, just Miss Grace. She didn't have a husband or kids at home. She didn't post on Facebook or own a microwave. But if you lived within 5 blocks of that porch, you knew her name like you knew your own mother's hum. She was the kind of woman who waved to strangers, baked biscuits from scratch every Sunday, and never let anyone leave her house without a full belly and a little more hope. People called her different names. The Porch Saint, the Last Good, Soul on Sycamore Lane. But to most, she was simply Mama Grace. Her home smelled like stories. Warm cornbread, black-eyed peas, a hint of vanilla from the cookies she always had on the table. And always, always there was gumbo simmering on the stove, even if no one was expected. She lived alone, but she wasn't lonely. Her life moved in gentle rhythms, sunlight across tomato vines in the morning, gospel on the radio by noon, and her rocker swaying softly by dusk. She didn't rush, didn't shout, didn't worry. Not much anyway. At 72, she had seen too much of the world to let it shake her anymore. Until that night. The rain came soft at first, like a secret, a hush against the windows, the kind of drizzle that made everything seem slower, softer, more fragile. Grace was pulling a skillet of cornbread from the oven, its crust just the right kind of golden, when she heard it. A knock. Not loud, not hurried, a whisper of a sound. So faint it might have been the wind if it weren't for that second knock. Then a third. Grace paused. Her heart didn't race, but it leaned forward, alert. The kind of alert that only women like her, who've buried husbands, raised neighbors' kids, and prayed through long nights, ever understand. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved toward the door. The door clicked shut behind them with a sound so soft it felt sacred, like the hush that falls in a church when the last hymn fades. Inside, the warm amber light from the kitchen wrapped itself around the boy like a blanket. Not a thick one, not a perfect one, but enough. Enough to say, "You're inside now. You're not out there anymore." Miss Grace didn't ask his name. Not yet. She knew some questions weigh more than the people who carry them. She turned back to the stove. The gumbo hadn't burned. Blessing number 1. She reached into the drawer and pulled out a clean dish towel, folded it once, set it on the table, poured the soup into a wide ceramic bowl. Her motion slow, practiced, gentle. "I made this with okra and smoked sausage," she said softly, not looking at him. "Got a little kick, but it's kind to the belly." Then she added a slice of cornbread, golden, steaming, placed it on the side of the bowl like it had been waiting for someone just like him. The boy didn't move. He stood in the doorway like a shadow cast in flesh. Water pooled at his feet, his arms still locked across his chest like a fortress made of bones. His eyes darted to corners, to shadows, like he expected something, someone, to come out of them. Miss Grace didn't push. She just took a step, back and nodded toward the table. Her silence wasn't cold. It was an invitation. And slowly the boy moved, like a stray animal testing trust. Step by step he approached the table. He didn't sit, not yet. Just hovered, like sitting down might mean staying. His fingers shook as he reached for the spoon. The first bite was hesitant, suspicious. The second, faster. By the third, his shoulders had dropped an inch. By the fifth, his breathing slowed. And by the time he tore off a piece of cornbread and dipped it into the bowl, the silence between them had shifted from tension to healing. Miss Grace stayed at the sink, quietly wiping down a plate that didn't need drying. She watched him, not in fear, not with judgment, but with a softness that had nothing to do with pity. She had seen bruises before. She had seen this silence before, the kind that didn't come from shyness, but from survival. When he finished, he looked up, just for a second. Their eyes met, and in his gaze she saw it. Not a question exactly, not words, but a plea. "Am I safe here?" She didn't speak right away, just gave him a slow, firm nod, like answering a prayer instead of a question. "You got a name, baby?" she asked. Her voice was velvet wrapped in steel, gentle but unshakable. He hesitated, then whispered, "Elijah." It came out hoarse, like it had been stuck somewhere deep, or like he hadn't used it in so long, he forgot how it felt on his tongue. "That's a strong name," she said, smiling softly. "Strong like roots." He looked down at his hands, clenched tightly in his lap. Then, without looking up, he said, "Please don't call nobody. I'll be good. I can't go back." The sentence didn't come out clean. It cracked at the edges, collapsed halfway through. But the message, the message, was clear. Miss Grace stepped forward, opened a drawer by the fridge, pulled out an old, soft Afghan blanket, one she'd crocheted years ago for her nephew before life swept him away. She laid it over Elijah's shoulders with a gentleness so careful, he flinched. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. "Ain't sending you back, sugar," she said quietly. "Not tonight, not ever to danger." She knelt beside him so they were eye to eye. Her hands cupped his chilled ones. "But I do have to call someone, not to take you away, to help. The right way. You're safe here till then. You hear me?" His lip quivered. He didn't cry. Not really. But a single tear slid down his cheek. It didn't fall like a sob. It just existed, like it had been waiting for permission. Miss Grace wiped it away with her thumb, as reverently as if she were tucking in a child for the first time. Then she stood and disappeared into the next room. There was the click of the old rotary phone, the slow, deliberate turns of the dial. Each number sounded like a heartbeat. "Evening, this is Grace Holloway," she said. "I need someone who knows what to do. No uniforms, no lights, just someone trained in child welfare. Please, he's just started breathing again." By the time she returned, Elijah was curled on her couch, the Afghan wrapped around him like armor, the empty bowl resting beside him. She didn't wake him, just sat beside him, one hand resting gently on his shoulder. She knew what systems were. She'd seen them work and fail. But tonight wasn't about systems. Tonight she was the system, and she would hold the night like a shield around this boy. For once in his life, Elijah Carter wasn't running. He was home. The light slipped softly through lace curtains, casting golden lines across the hardwood floor where Elijah still slept, curled into the couch like a seed not yet sure it had permission to grow. Miss Grace hadn't slept. She sat in her worn armchair, wrapped in a shawl the same color as twilight, her eyes never leaving the boy. There was something sacred about watching over someone who didn't yet know how to ask for protection. She'd done it before. Fostered, fed, mended. But this boy had walked in with a silence that screamed and a stillness that trembled beneath every breath. At precisely 7:12 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Not loud, not soft, just steady. When Miss Grace opened it, a woman stood on the porch, mid-40s, clipboard in hand, hair pulled back, posture precise. But her eyes held something human. Ms. Dana Rivers, Department of Family and Children's Services. She stepped inside without disturbing the quiet. No flashing lights, no uniform, just respect. They sat in the kitchen, voices low, while Elijah remained asleep. Miss Grace described everything, the bruises, the flinching, the way Elijah looked at kindness like it was dangerous. Ms. Rivers listened, really listened. Her pencil scratched notes onto her clipboard, but her face never turned cold. "He's run before," she murmured. But this time, someone opened the door. When it came time to wake him, Miss Grace did it herself. She sat beside him, laid a hand on his shoulder, and whispered his name like a lullaby in reverse. He stirred with a start, panic flashing in his eyes, as if he expected to be yanked away. But then, he saw her, just her, and the fear eased. Not gone, but quieter. "Elijah, baby," she said. "There's a kind lady here who wants to help. She ain't gonna hurt you, but we do need to talk about what comes next." He sat up slowly, arms wrapped tight around his knees. His voice was a whisper wrapped in surrender. "Do I have to leave?" Not defiant, not angry, just tired, just expecting the ache. Miss Grace reached for his hand, held it with both of hers. "Not right now. And not to where you came from. That ain't ever happening again, you hear me?" Ms. Rivers knelt beside them. Her tone was professional but warm. "Elijah, we'll find a safe place for you. A foster home where you'll be looked after, but for the next few days, if it's all right with Miss Grace, you can stay here while we get things in place." Miss Grace didn't flinch. "He's got a room already," she said simply. "Hasn't been touched in years, but the bed's still there. Quilt still smells like lavender. And I got enough groceries for a week. Don't need no government check. Just need to know he's not going back to hell." Elijah blinked at that. Something flickered in his eyes, between disbelief and hope. That afternoon they walked to the store. Not for toys. Miss Grace didn't spoil. Just the basics. Socks without holes. A toothbrush of his own. A second-hand denim jacket Elijah picked with a small grin. So small it barely counted. But she saw it. She noticed everything. Over the next few days, Elijah began to thaw. Not all at once. Not cleanly. Shadows still followed him. At night, he clenched his fists in his sleep. He flinched when people walked too fast. Some mornings, he forgot to speak at all. But every time he broke, Miss Grace was there, holding the edges, piecing him back together without needing glue or words. She taught him how to stir roux without burning it, how to shell peas with patience, how to read the wind through the trees. He listened, not always with ears, but with the way he began to set the table without being asked, the way he leaned his head softly against her shoulder during gospel hour on Sunday afternoons. He was learning something sacred that love didn't always shout. Sometimes it just stayed. A week passed. Ms. Rivers returned with news. A foster placement had opened up. When Elijah packed, he didn't cry. But his hands shook. He had so little. A few clothes, a book Miss Grace gave him, and the small notebook she had tucked beneath his pillow. On the first page, in her neat, curling handwriting, she'd written, "You are seen. You are safe. You are somebody." Those 9 words became his armor. As he stood by the front door, backpack slung over one shoulder, his voice cracked like old wood. "Will I see you again?" Miss Grace, now 72 years strong and undefeated by time, cupped his cheek with a trembling, "And you will, baby. I'm right here. This door don't close on people who need love." He nodded, didn't cry, but when he turned to walk down the porch steps, he glanced back once. Just once, and she smiled, not because it didn't hurt, but because some goodbyes carry more promise than pain. Inside, her house felt quieter, but not empty. Something had taken root, and though she couldn't know it, not fully, not yet, that boy she once fed soup to would one day carry her name farther than Willow Street had ever stretched. The years passed like pages turning in a book worn soft by memory. Elijah Carter moved through them with quiet resolve. He studied hard, debated harder, graduated top of his class, earned his law degree on full scholarship, interned for judges, whose names carried weight. But through every courtroom, every speech, every sleepless night, he carried something more precious than ambition. He carried her words. "You are seen. You are safe. You are somebody." Each morning, he read that line in her handwriting, faded now from the oil of his fingers, but no less sacred. Miss Grace, meanwhile, grew slower, her hands stiffer, her mornings earlier. But she never locked her door, never stopped baking biscuits, never stopped believing that one small act of mercy could shift the entire arc of a life. And then, one spring morning, she opened her mailbox to find a thick cream envelope, no return address, just her name, Grace Holloway, written in a hand she would recognize in the dark. Inside, a single sheet of paper, headed with deep blue lettering, United States District Court. Her fingers trembled. The letter read, "Dearest Mama Grace, tomorrow I will be sworn in as a federal judge. There will be cameras, reporters, and speeches. But before I tell the world how I got here, I want you to have these words first. None of this robe, this seat, this title, is mine without you. You saw me when I was invisible. You fed me when I was starving for more than food. You gave me a name worth answering to. And tomorrow, when they ask who built me, I will say your name. I love you, Mama. Always have. Always will. Your son Elijah." Miss Grace didn't need anything more in that moment. Not applause, not a parade. Her eyes welled with something deep, something holy. Later that day, Malik, the neighbor boy, brought over his laptop. "You gotta see this, Miss Grace," he said with a grin. And there he was, Judge Elijah Carter, standing tall in a courtroom draped in marble and silence. He told them about her, about the gumbo, about the night he knocked, about the woman who opened her door and never let it close again. When he said her name, Grace Holloway, the courtroom stirred. But Miss Grace, she didn't move. She just placed her hand over her chest and whispered, "I've been famous to the only heart that ever mattered." But Elijah wasn't done. The next morning, before dew had lifted off the grass, a black sedan pulled into her driveway. No knock, just arms wrapped around her as he whispered, "I came home. I'm not here to visit. I'm here to stay, if you'll have me. I want to take care of you now." And that night, under the roof where a frightened boy once slept wrapped in an Afghan in hope, Elijah knelt beside her rocker and said, "Mama, I want to make it official, not just in my heart, in name." Her eyes shimmered. "You always were, baby," she whispered. "From the moment you knocked." He signed the papers that night, making her not just the woman who saved him, but his mother. Somewhere in America right now, there's another child standing in the rain waiting for someone to open a door. And somewhere else, there's a person like Grace Holloway. Maybe not rich, maybe not young, but powerful in the only way that matters. With a heart wide enough to save a life, Elijah Carter became a federal judge. But long before the robe, before the title, he was just a boy who was seen, fed, and believed in by a woman the world never noticed. Until now. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Be someone's grace, and when people ask what justice looks like, you can say, sometimes it wears an apron, smells like cornbread, and opens its door without asking questions. Subscribe for more real stories that remind us, love isn't loud, it just shows up.